Namaskar. Welcome to the Indian AdGeek episode 30. My name is Vishal Mehra. I usually do audio only podcasts, but with this episode onwards, you'll have the option of seeing video as well. And for this special episode, I did not want just another guest. I wanted someone who stood on both sides of the mirror, someone who ran the boardroom as president of McCann-Erickson, one of India's premier advertising agencies, and then turned around and wrote the definitive decoding of the Indian middle class in a book called Mother Pious Lady, examining how the everyday life of middle class India has evolved, part admin, part anthropologist. Today, he is the managing director and CEO of Future Brands India and founder of Think9 Consumer Technologies. And for years, his weekly column, City City Bang Bang, in the Times of India has turned the small print of everyday India into cultural theory. If Indian advertising ever needed a philosopher in residence, it's this man. Here's my conversation with Santosh Desai. Enjoy. Hi, Santosh. Welcome to the Indian AdGeek.
Thank you so much, Vishal. Pleasure to be here.
You've of course been a CEO. You're a writer. You're a cultural philosopher. Of course, now a founder. You're mentoring companies. How did advertising even happen for you? And when did you realize you wanted to do so many multiple things?
Yeah, so advertising happened to me actually during my MBA, where I decided that I didn't want to be in stuffy, boring professions. A lot of those were on offer, and advertising seemed to be fun. It seemed to be creative, and it just there seemed to be a natural alignment. And so it happened, therefore, very early in my career. 6 months after I passed out, I got my first advertising job. And I was in advertising for 21 years. And since then, also, what I've been doing is in some ways related to advertising. I think the other things happened in some ways because of advertising. Because while I was always interested in reading and I was always interested in thinking about things, advertising is the kind of place which allows you to do all of that. A. B, I joined advertising at a particularly interesting juncture. I joined advertising in 1986 when the first tiny shoots of economic reform had taken place, and then 1991 is when we had liberalization. So by the time liberalization came, I was kind of in advertising for a while, and I think it became the questions that started being asked of advertising agencies, and I was in strategic planning at that time, was essentially to interpret international brands for India and India for international brands. So, you are the kind of cultural middleman trying to kind of mediate between those two kind of forces. And a lot of international brands came with very delusional ideas about India, very incomplete ideas about India. And so you had to kind of explain India to them. And then you found that, most of us who come to places like advertising come from little pockets, little cocoons, where our understanding of our own country is quite scant. It's a very scanty, very sparse understanding we have. We try and extrapolate from our immediate kind of surroundings, and therefore they became a kind of a quest for me to try and understand and explain India to myself first, and that is an impossible kind of a task because India is vast, it's diverse, it is uneven, and it is changing very fast and very erratically. So, I mean, in that sense, it's a fool's errand to try and say that I will understand India. And the other problem with India is that you can't understand a part without understanding the whole. And you can't just say I want to understand beauty in India if you don't understand, how does identity get formed, where does the premium for fairness come from, and then you go to caste, and so it's like every piece. If you really want to understand, you have to understand all the other pieces within which that piece is embedded. And I think therefore, and from there spun off other things. So once you were doing that kind of stuff, I stumbled into writing purely by accident, but not by design. And therefore, again, mentoring companies or working in the advisory capacity happened as a result of that. By working in that company, the idea of setting up a company which helps other founders build their own businesses also was an offshoot of that. So in some ways, there are many things. They're all somewhat related.
Right. And maybe taking a cue from what you were just saying, the the most formative lessons in advertising really come from pitches that were won, right? And like with life, you learn more from failure than from victories. Is there a specific instance you can share with us where you had a sharp cultural insight from a, or rather for a major client, something you knew was right, but they were slightly fearful, hesitant to go with it, and what happened to that insight eventually?
Yes, first pitch, which was where I thought, and this is the thing that comes to mind right now, was for VIP suitcases, and they were going through this thing of how to be relevant in a world that was changing, and being a legacy brand, etc. We had this idea which we called belong everywhere. The notion that with luggage of a certain kind, what you look for in luggage when you travel is the idea. Earlier, the idea in India was the fact that you retain you were fearful of travel. So in India, for instance, we had those big trunks where you could put dead bodies in. We would tie our luggage into next to ourselves and keep it. It is very fearful, and travel was a very fear inducing idea. As soon as you got off, you had to send a letter or do a phone call saying कि मैं पहुंच गया, I have reached safely. Who knows what could happen? And people would drop you on a train, and somebody would receive you on the train, and yet there was this fear कि बीच में कहीं train में you will get lost. There was that kind of a anxiety which was strange. I think from that culture, the idea that as we became more well traveled, the idea of fitting in effortlessly anywhere, and luggage being a very important marker of the fact that you are a global citizen in some form, culturally at home with wherever you might go. So I think that was one pitch that I thought we should have won. The other example, which is not a pitch, but it's always a regret to me because it's an idea that I thought was much bigger, and it was not allowed to be so. That was for Stayfree, which is a sandpad brand. And the idea was about, and it came from the fact that it was a mainstream brand, priced well, uh, and really in India there is still was low penetration of sandpad usage, and people were using homemade solutions. And here it was possible for a brand to kind of make a dent in that. The problem with a lot of sandpad advertising is the fact that it's shame based. It is the fact that, oh my god, it'll show. And therefore and therefore you have absurd representations of women wearing tight white jeans riding horses to show that all is well, which is ridiculous. I mean, during during that period, for women to imagine doing that just to make this point was absurd. And so the starting point was that, what if instead of shame, we were to look at it in a different perspective. And the idea there that we developed was the idea called women for women. And this is way before all the, I'm talking about like 20 years ago or more maybe, where this whole women empowerment advertising was not the norm. Right. So the idea that what this brand is about, instead of a mother-in-law saying, no, why are you using a pad and why are you spending on a pad? Why don't you use, I use homemade things, why don't you? Instead of that, what if we had role models like the helpful mother-in-law, or you create a world where women support women, and there is this idea that menstruation is an everyday problem. It is part of life. It is, and this support system, instead of women actually looking askance and saying, oh, why is it showing, it's about, if somebody is in trouble, somebody else comes and helps. The idea that you create a world around this brand, which is women supporting each other, which I thought I had a very strong stake in. We even executed it in a very half-hearted, unconvinced way, and gave it up very, very soon. So that is the other regret. Although it's not a pitch, but and it was an existing client, but it's something that I thought had much more kind of room in it than what finally got used.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds ahead of its time. If you look at at the middle class in the country, the word which gets used often, whether you go to a MNC, go through their deck, or do you go through an Indian run company's deck, is aspiration. Since liberalization, like you were just talking about. But if you look at the kind of economy we have in so many ways these days, a K-shaped economy where FMCG majors talk about in their quarterly earnings how some growth is stagnated, right? You see Q-commerce serving what 30, 40, 45 million customers in India on everyday basis, but in some ways the Bharat, again another side of India you were alluding to some time back, that is somewhat again stagnating. Do you think it's broken now? Has it gone from a insight to now a marketing myth?
Yeah, I think there's something to what you say. I do think that there was a time when we thought that the India story would always be about numbers and about the upward push that you would see, from people coming in, and that the space at which people would be coming into the consuming class would accelerate, and that would form the bulk of consumption. I think in the last few years, I think we are beginning to see that that is not playing out exactly as we hoped it might. And while there are many economic reasons for that, I do think that while aspiration itself is still a powerful force, the affordability to accompany that aspiration has not kept pace. One, two, and this is a somewhat counterintuitive kind of a thing, which is the fact that in some small way, and I want to emphasize small here, technology has become a kind of a pacifier, in the sense that it has allowed people to consume or get a sense of consumption without actually spending money. So what happens is that what you look for, what is consumption fundamentally about beyond the basics? It is about feeling better about yourself, feeling that you belong to a certain identity cohort, feeling that you are, upgrading yourself in life, feeling that you matter, that you are important, that you are significant. All of these are in some ways being provided by technology, by social media. Of course, at the most basic level, you're using time, you're consuming time. It just gobbles up your time. So you can be in a state of almost like you are in a trance like situation when you are on your phone and you just scrolling, the doom scrolling, and just spending hours believing that you're doing something worthwhile. Secondly, what it does is that it gives you a sense of self-worth. I mean, when you put your something up and you get lots of likes, there is a sense of self-worth that comes when you put something on Twitter /X, and you say something nasty to somebody and you get a reaction, you feel important. So it is counterintuitive to say, because in many ways technology has done the opposite. It has actually really helped build aspiration. But on the flip side, there is also the fact that you are able to live a life of relative stagnation, but believing that it is worthwhile because you are getting something, for yourself.
Um, if you look at regional brands, you look at Patanjali, of course, is now much more national. There are so many regional QSRs you look at, and every part of the country has their own set of preferred brands, right? And they are out competing national brands in so many categories. So many folks in advertising, in brand strategy rooms, they're still packaging Bharat as a monolith, right? Do you think we as the advertising agency or the advertising world are guilty of creating this caricature of non-metro India that simply does not exist anymore?
Absolutely. I do think that, both the questions that you asked, have we stereotyped, non-metro India? Absolutely. Absolutely stereotyped. No, I have always have and continue to do so, because it is from a metro, kind of a perspective, it feels like something distant and something remote and something culturally kind of, removed from where you are. Whereas in reality, that is not the case. And here technology has bridged the gap enormously. Everybody is exposed to the same things. Everybody has access to the same thing, and therefore the idea that you somehow metro, you see, because all notions like this are rest on an implicit linearity. The fact that Delhi is 5 years ahead of Lucknow, which is 3 years ahead of Ranchi, which is 2 years ahead of Muzaffarnagar. I mean, that's the kind of a scale that we have. And it rested on linear ideas like roads and electricity, because as roads go, development goes. Now development happens through non-linear ideas, because it's OTT, it's direct, it's, you directly, the internet comes to you regardless, right, across the country. So therefore, that old notion, which is so hardwired in us, that there is this linear gap, this gap that exists in time between the metros and non-metros, that is fundamentally wrong. Secondly, I think what has happened is also the fact that consumers are looking for new ideas. They're looking for more culturally rooted ideas. They're looking to be excited, and everyone is trying to write their own life script in their own ways, using their own reference points, right? So I am trying to write, so that's what has happened, because everybody now has to present themselves on social media. Everybody is somebody. Everybody has to now, write a script for themselves. It's not just about shooting selfies and putting on DPs and changing DPs. You have to be somebody on social media to be interesting. Now you need material for that, and consumption is a very powerful material. So you want new reference points. If, like everybody else, you are using a national brand, you know it is not telling a distinctive story about you. So I think regional brands are part. They have many reasons for the rise of regional brands. One of the reasons is the fact that the consumer wants to tell a particular life story about themselves. They want it to be culturally rooted, and regional brands do that much better than national brands do, because in India, cultural differences are material. They are strong. They are significant. The other thing is that from the supply side, the differences between national brands and regional brands have narrowed. Earlier, you had differences in terms of distribution. Now, in fact, regional brands go deeper into their own areas. So that is no longer a distinction. They had better talent. Now, regional brands have access to talent, which is also very good talent that you have. If you go to regional brands across the country, you will find that talent is not a problem. Access to capital is not a problem today, unless it was earlier. And media has become much more regional, much more fragmented, and therefore the whole advantage of scale that you had when you built national brands because of national options in media do not apply. So both from the supply side and from the demand side, we are seeing a reason why regional brands are doing well. And it helps the fact that the big players, even from organizationally, they don't have an ability to serve regional interests, simply because organizationally they are centralized. So what the Indian management suffers because of the fact that there's global management doesn't understand India. The same thing happens because the management sitting in Bombay does not understand Madurai. It's exactly the same thing. So it's interesting. Reason why, I guess, a bunch of reasons why regional brands are doing the way they are.
There is, of course, a simultaneous assertion of hyper local identity, of language, of caste, of region, native consumption of global formats. You see so much of Korean content, so much of Turkish content being everywhere. There are, people are much more in tune with global fashion trends. You have written about how India domesticates modernity, right? Are we seeing the first Indian generation that is not domesticating anything? And if yes, what does brand building look like when that translation layer disappears?
That's an interesting question. And I'm not sure yet that the answer is the fact that there is no sort of a translation happening or no hybridization happening at all. Yes, I do think that there are, in some cases, there is a direct kind of an import of cultural influences. If you look at K-pop, for instance, and its popularity, you will see that, yes, you see that its influence is in its pure form, not in an hybridized form today. But I would still argue that, for a vast majority of India, including Gen Z, if you were to, I was to look at reels today, for instance, and say, how many reels do I see that are fundamentally global or influenced from the outside in the way that they're presented or templated? Barely any. Barely any. You would find that the most popular kind of content is the one that is still very Indian in its sensibility, using cultural material from everywhere. But it does not fundamentally, the sensibility is not an international sensibility. The mechanism at work is much deeper than a generational shift. The mechanism at work, which is what hybridizes and where we are not accepting things as they are, is rooted so much deeper that I would struggle to think of examples at scale which are where the outside influence is being consumed as it is. We've always been influenced by other cultures. We've always been influenced by other countries. I do not see fundamentally, for instance, even if I was to look at, say, Korean influence on skincare, say, right? which is in some senses so you borrow the idea of what you are looking for, but you're not borrowing. I mean, we're not seeing Korean faces, we are seeing Korean ideas that are adapted to Indian faces, right? So I don't think that I'm seeing enough change to for me to say that there's a fundamental shift that has happened. Could it happen in the future? Perhaps, but I would bet against that at least in the next 5 years. But I'm happy to be wrong also.
All these top Indian brands who have made it big in the last 5 odd years. You look at brands like Zepto or a Swiggy or a Cred or a Boat. None of them have built equity in the classical way, right? So from that sense, is the traditional playbook of awareness and then relevance and then differentiation, is that obsolete for challenger brands in India today, or do you think it's just being applied in new places?
No, I do. I think it was always obsolete. I, I thought it is always obsolete. Actually, we have never built brands linearly like that. कि पहले awareness, उसके बाद differentiation. I mean, it has never worked like that. We have been living with this technology for a long time. There is simultaneity. This whole idea of a sequential process by which things get built is simply not true. The number of times that I would see something, a new brand, and buy it instantly because it speaks to me in some form without knowing the first thing about it. And at best, checking out some ratings and figuring out, if at all I feel so inclined to do that, I just go ahead and buy it because I now have faith in the mechanisms that I can return it. I have faith in that mechanism, right? So, there are ratings which were not available earlier. So, what has happened is that consumption today happens in a more fluid, complex way. And it does not happen the funnel, the idea of a funnel also, through which it gradually kind of descends. And so you have the idea of the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel. As crude general frameworks, they have some value. But as specific to any category and any brand, unless you have to think about it from scratch, you have to look at the mechanism, and you will find that it's like a scatter diagram, rather than a shape. You will see lots of different behaviors happening simultaneously rather than a smooth kind of a way through which consumer moves. And you will have different consumers acting differently. So I think it is a much more complicated, much more fluid, much less linear kind of an understanding of how consumers move through the process of buying and deciding to buy. And I think a very big disruption has happened, but our understanding, I don't think, has kept pace similarly.
Swiggy's in-house grocery brand Noise, I think, is an example of what you were just saying. I sampled it first, and now I like so many products in it. I had no idea when I bought it, and then now the whole product range of Noise across categories is fantastic. On the decision buying process you were just talking about, AI is playing such a massive role in that, right? I mean, all these AI powered answer engines, you think about Chat GPT or Perplexity or Gemini or Claude, they are becoming the first place of brand discovery now. And some would argue the whole craft of brand building is getting disrupted at its core. I have read a sentence in my preparation for this conversation where you had written, AI cannot tell if tears are warm or cold. And I thought that was so beautiful and so true. In a market like ours, where scale is so important, do you think just good enough, AI generated work can actually be much more profitable than the perfect human insight? And how do you sell those warm tears or cold tears to a CFO focused on cost per impression?
No, that is going to be a challenge in particularly in the short term. That is going to be a challenge. I mean, it's hardly as if most work that you see is in any case highly insightful or deeply creative. I think it's a false binary in the first place. Most of the work, no, not most, almost like what 98, 99% of the work is chalta hai, chalega. So why should we believe that cannot get replaced? Of course, it will get replaced, as it should be. There is nothing particularly mystical about human beings. I mean, when we do brilliant things and when we do outstanding things, yes, there is a quality to human beings that I think is special and cannot be duplicated. But we don't do special things. No? We do very ordinary things most of the time, and they can be easily replicated as they should be. So, I mean, I think it's an existential threat that I think the industry will face. That even marketing, in terms of having to relearn its rules, will face. But the existential threat is with advertising more than it is with marketing, which is the fact that somebody can easily do the kind of a lot of the mediocre work that we do can get replaced, and as it should be. So, I mean, I absolutely see this. I certainly am not going to argue that, oh, there is something so uniquely human about the way we think that AI can never really capture that. And it's only the CFO's cold-bloodedness that is keeping, AI in business. But had that person been more sensitive and been more human, they would have seen the real value that advertising produces. Rubbish. There is no real value that advertising produces most of the time. Campaign, yeah, that you would say, and that, does all the things that you would like it to do. Of course, I mean, I'm not arguing that is true 100% of the time, but would argue that a vast majority of the stuff that you see it can be done easily, and we have fetishized the process. Here's an industry that prided itself on the fact that we understand there's a science to it, and there's work, and there is a whole bunch of. So every time I see some campaign being presented on social media, and when you see the list of names, there are 25 people at least who are listed every time a campaign is presented. Right? There'll be planners and servicing people and actual creative people who did it, creative gods who will have put their name on it, servicing gods who will put their name on it, etc., etc., etc. Right? So you have a bunch of 25 people who have allegedly worked on that piece of campaign. Now, what does a creator do on the other hand? One person, maybe one other collaborator, producing about 100 times the volume of work that advertising agencies produce, getting many more responses and likes and followers than campaigns get that have to be pushed, and money has to be spent to get people to see them. We are the industry that was supposed to be experts in short form storytelling. Right? We prided ourselves on short form storytelling through the years. Now, then came a medium only about short form storytelling, TikTok and Reels. And is there an advertising creator there who's worth their salt? Who are the creators there? People from nowhere. Housewives from bloody Murshidabad. Right? And not a single advertising creator. Not one person who is in the Reels community is a superstar. And we are supposed to be the experts, right? We are the storytellers in short form. How have random people from nowhere come in and told so many better stories than people who are supposed to be the experts and practicing it for decades? So, to me, therefore, I would not shy away at all. And I don't think the industry should shy away from saying it has created such an elaborate process between the brief and the iterations and the client iterations and the production, how and the huge costs of of producing things. You've created a system that has shackled yourself and made it impossible to deal with a new reality. And that's where I do think, and even now, so I am a very strong critic of the way the industry has responded to change. I believe that advertising should be ruling right now. I mean, the world has been created in advertising's likeness. We spend our life looking at hundreds of 30-second spots every day on Reels. And there is not one advertising spot in that. Or not even advertising spot, not created by an advertising person. You're free to disagree, Vishal.
I would argue that so many great storytellers that in advertising now, especially the new ones, they've had their background in social media, in other forms of storytelling.
Right.
And from that sense, I think our business has also been very open, uh, accepting their form of storytelling, accepting their craft. I absolutely do agree with you that we are supposed to be the masters of short form storytelling. And where are we on Instagram Reels and TikTok and whatnot? I think the greatest thing about our industry is the scale that we can give to brands. Nobody else can.
Of course, no, I absolutely hope you're right. There are such wonderful things about this profession. And so I'm not arguing against that. I'm only saying that in today's context, I think we have the profession, and I'm not actually part of it. I keep saying we because I, in some ways, still think of myself as an advertising person. But I think there was this opportunity that was a massive opportunity where advertising could have set the terms, for of engagement for the future. Instead, it has chosen to shrink and allowed, you know, and it's not that it's allowed it's that it was democratized and everybody came forward. They came forward much better than advertising did. And the fact that today you're seeing the kind of turmoil in the industry, right? So it's hardly as if empirically, things are going great, and here's somebody coming and sitting and criticizing it. The fact of the matter is that there is a genuine crisis in the industry, and the genuine crisis comes from the fact that clients do not believe that advertising in its old form and its in the way that it has been programmed to work is working enough. The reason why you have so many independent agencies come up is that there is more faith in people than in systems and in institutions. And so the one thing that advertising has been terrible at is building and sustaining advertising brands. We have destroyed the most number of advertising brands in the industry than any other industry. You what is HTA called today? Some weird VML. What is low called? Every week it changes its name. I am out of advertising now for 20 years, so I don't know what person was in which agency. Now today I don't know which agency is in which agency. Earlier I didn't know which person, because now low has become part of something. It is part of Omnicom. Similarly, McCann. So I'm just saying it's come to that state. So surely there is something that is going wrong, and surely it is time to kind of address that and focus, first identify it and then address it.
Right. Let's talk about clients a little bit. One would say that Indian clients underpay for strategy and for brand thinking, but they would happily spend crores on production. As someone who has built an agency relationship and a consulting practice, of course, can you talk about a client engagement where you successfully shifted the agency's role from just being a vendor, a creative vendor, to more like a strategic partner? And what was the business problem that was solved? And how do you protect the value of intellectual work in a market that is commodifying ideas actually so fast?
And I'm talking 20 years ago, and things might be different today, and I absolutely acknowledge that. But till 20 years ago, let me talk about my McCann experience, where I was for 10 years. And because of the fact that we built a very robust planning practice, which was based on an understanding of India, which was, I dare say, deeper than what the industry was used to doing, deeply cultural kind of an understanding of India, it gave us an advantage because clients came to us very often just to listen to that. And so we were acknowledged as experts in that area, and someone worth. And so the number of times that I have spoken to international teams of clients, talking to them about India, so this becomes the port of call to come and tell them about this. What is important is that advertising agencies must have a source of expertise, where clients acknowledge that this better than they do. And once you have that, then the strategic relationship is not difficult to manage, because that is what actually is the relationship is about. That I'm expert in something, you are expert in something, and we kind of come together, and the transactional part of it therefore becomes less significant. It becomes a relationship based on things other than a transaction. And so there are many examples. With Coke, for instance, we were always strategic partners. We were never anything less. With Titan, and we did a lot of work with Titan, and we were strategic partners. We were never anything less. And let me give you an example of Tanishq. While I was in advertising, we had a consulting practice, so we worked with them through the consulting practice while being in advertising. And the fact that we could run a consulting practice in advertising, at that time it was called Lighthouse, is testimony to the fact that clients would come to us for strategy alone, and they would be willing to pay for it. And so we did work for Tanishq, which was to solve a problem of theirs purely through strategy. And we actually worked while I was in
This is which year?
This will be 2005, I think. That we worked with Ogilvy as an agency. So while being in McCann, we briefed and Piyush on the campaign, and they did the campaign.
Wouldn't I have liked to be a fly on the wall in that room? Wow.
So it's interesting that at that time this was not I was not part of Future Brands when this happened. So I think it is possible. But I think you need to have something to say, something that you bring to the table.
And the thing is that especially with all these AI tools now, even the first couple of layers of strategic thinking or insights is so commonplace now. The need to go deeper now is more than ever. I remember my bosses used to tell me, you have to go down to five whys. Keep going down. Why? And yeah, the need for that is more than ever. Santosh, you are of course widely regarded as the primary cultural decoder in India. How do you institutionalize that gut feeling for culture? Can that be taught? Can that be systemized? Can that be productized? Or do you think scaling it might dilute it?
Yeah, so I'm not particularly interested in scaling it. What I am interested in, but institutionalizing it, absolutely. For instance, the team that we have, which actually does all the work today, but uh, and that is because we work together, and we have worked together. A lot of us have worked together for a long time, and so I think this way of seeing the world, I think, is something that is osmotic. It is not something you kind of teach, but it is something that people pick up by working together over a period of time, and that is what has happened. And we have a way. I mean, it is not all gut feel. It is, the fact that how we behave gives a cue to what are the underlying patterns that govern that behavior, right? The word decoding comes from saying, looking at stuff around you and just being able to ask that, what does this mean? And what else can I connect it to? What larger pattern is this a part of? I think that is the process that, very simply put, that is the process that is followed by just connecting bits and bits and bits. And as you build out a way of explanations, what happens is that they keep expanding, and then you also, things change, so you keep challenging it. And so it's like a system of understanding that grows with time. And once you have that system and there are interlocking pieces, it becomes much more robust. And it becomes shared. And I think that's what we have. We have a shared way of seeing the world. And therefore, that is how it gets institutionalized in some ways, that people pick up a certain way of seeing the world, and it therefore it comes more effortlessly every single time. But the question about AI and all, I think one of the things I find very fascinating about AI is what it can give you. But what is equally fascinating is the fact that it doesn't give you definitive answers. The problem with AI is the fact that, look at it this way, the same question you ask four different LLMs, it will give you four different answers. It will not necessarily give you the same answer. A. B, if you ask it to give you more answers, it will give you more answers, right? And so eventually, what is the right answer? It will not tell you. If you ask it, okay, what is the right answer, it will give you an answer. And then if you ask it, okay, is there another right answer, it will give you another right answer. The fact is that also, it cannot tell you what is the right answer. It can give you a set of answers. And that is the problem that a lot of people have, that if you keep asking it questions, it'll keep giving you answers. If you say, give me three more, it'll give you three more answers. If you say, give me five more, it'll give you five more answers, right? I mean, that's a great advantage. Now, if you say, evaluate all, it'll evaluate, right? The point is the fact that there is the idea of a definitive. See, eventually we do only one thing. We may think a lot of things, but you do one thing, right? To depend on AI for that one thing is very difficult unless you're solving an objective problem. Objective problem solving, sure. But subjective problem solving, it is an endless process. You can keep refining it. You prompt it differently, it'll give you a different answer. You introduce one more variable in it, it'll give you a different answer. And I think, which is the reason, when you actually use AI for subjective kind of problems, you realize that actually coming to an answer is difficult. But opening out the problem, allowing you to see different facets, it can be very useful. Eventually, for you to say, no, putting my finger on saying, okay, I want to do that, comes from deep insight, deep understanding, the ability to put together several variables in your head in a fluid kind of a way that you don't understand. I think that is still something which is in the human domain.
Yeah. Yeah. At Future Brand, thinking is non-linear, invisible, like you were saying, can be also personal from one person to another, deeply personal, right? How is Future Brands actually structured commercially? And are you retainer led, are you project led, are you outcome linked? And has the firm ever successfully decoupled its revenue from your personal calendar, Santosh?
Yeah, so we are open to all models. So we broadly offer two kinds of outcomes or services. One is advisory, where we are project based. We work with you on a question that is asked. We come back to you with the answer. The other is what we call partnership, where we work with a lot of startups and some small companies, where we undertake the execution of the brand, thought also. And so we work with creative partners. We'll work with all, whether it's a retail design partner, a creative partner, identity partner. We will work and help you execute those plans. And those are longer term, continuous relationships. Those are retainers more often than not, where we work through the year and help you execute. These are project based. The second part of it, how is it decoupled from my personal time? It is now substantially decoupled. I mean, people will ask always that, say, will you be available at the strategy stage, which I also like to be. But we have now done enough projects where I have not had anything to do. I've been not even been a spectator. I mean, it just happened on its own. But in still a large number of projects, I think what is asked is involvement at the strategic level.
Which has been talked a lot in advertising circles, is the coming onslaught of consultancies and all these big guys who already have direct access to C suite. They are building up their creative firm. They also now have major brand and consumer practices. They have their own data platforms, they have their own analysts. They might be pitching to the same boardrooms as you might be as future brands. So how do you win that room, Santosh?
Well, I think I don't think we've had too many occasions of that where we've kind of run up against established consultancies in a real sense. But I suspect it has to do with the fact that, there is a machine on the other end and you have a more a human, just in terms of narrative. That's that is a large machine. And if you're looking for a large machine, then we will are not the answer. And if you're not, and if you're looking for something which is more human, on insights alone and the softer aspects, I don't think they can compete with smaller consultancies like ours. On the larger data led and the integration with the business aspect, we can't compete with them. So actually at a certain level, there are two very distinct kind of clients and use cases where I would see the two. So if I was on the client side, and I am on the client side in many ways, I'm wearing a different hat, I would not actually ever see an overlap. And if I was ever thinking of going to the large consulting company, I can never think of looking at a small brand consulting like ours as an option. So as of now, at least, they haven't done enough to convince people that they can do what we do. And but people know that we can't do what they do. I mean, that I don't think there is any doubt about. But I think the fact that they can do the soft stuff and really get into the brand space, business space, category mappings, where all of that, yes. Brand space, they may be trying, but unless they align it with software, and then a brand head is only a small part of what they do. That, yes. But we have had enough occasion to sort of where other consultants have done something and we are called in then to do something else. So if anything, I see that as the combination where I saying.
Right. I wanted to understand a bit more about Think9. I whatever I've read, it's positioned at this intersection of consumer insight and technology. Are you a D2C branding incubator? Are you a data platform? Are you a content business? Something else? Where is the revenue coming from? Where do you expect it to be in 3 years?
Think9 essentially is a venture builder, right? We operate in the 0 to 100 space, 0 to 10, and then 10 to 100 in some cases. And what we do is we help create brands from scratch, and where we take a stake and where we provide resources and an ecosystem for brands to plug it. So that ecosystem encompasses brand thinking, technology, distribution, and we have resources that are plugged into us on design and communication also. So far, what we have done in the last 4 years is that I think, we've started about 12 businesses, out of which 8 are doing well. 2 or 3 of them are doing spectacularly well. The others are also kind of quite robust, and most of them are funded now. Almost virtually every is externally funded by prominent VCs and family offices. And the idea is to continue doing that. One new venture that we have started with, where Think9 is a partner, along with Nikhil Kamath, is the Foundry. In the Foundry, what we've did is that we are actually looking for young co-founders. And what we went through is a national exercise where we had about 38,000 applicants, which we had to successively reduce to about 34. And they are going through a 90-day program, a residential program in Alibag, where two things are happening simultaneously. They're getting inputs from across all. So every week is a different kind of a learning sort of a module, if you like. And over the 90 days, simultaneously, they build their businesses. We have generated a lot of these ideas, but we've kind of worked along with them. And so we want to create 20 businesses in 3 months, consumer businesses with these people. And the idea is, and they get funded, they get an initial seed funding of 4 crores from us, each of the businesses. And we want to sort of, therefore, build brands at scale. And we want to do this regularly.
Let's come back quickly to advertising. Last 2, 3 questions here, Santosh. The Indian industry seems to be improving as far as Cannes is concerned, winning awards and everything else. But if you look at strategic frameworks, they are rarely adopted by a global CMO. Do you think that has to do with the fact that our, the thinking that we have in our work and our advertising is vastly different from what their needs are? Is Cannes a relevant currency, or has it become more of a self-referential ecosystem?
To a degree, yes. But if the more culturally rooted you are, the less exportable it is. Right. It is more specific to where you are. But is the ability exportable? Absolutely exportable. But you need to invest in understanding other cultures. So the problem that we have when international strategists come to India and tell us how to do things is the fact that we say, okay, thank you so much, but sit down. Right. Is the reaction that Indian strategists have, which is exactly the same when if Indian strategists go elsewhere. Unless they work in the ecosystem, and the whole Southeast Asia is full of Indian strategists. But because they work in that ecosystem and because they are fundamentally smart and thoughtful people, it works. So strategists are certainly exportable. I'm not sure if strategy is exportable in a sense. And on Cannes, that is a favorite subject of mine, so I'll restrain myself a little bit. But I think it is the worst thing that has happened to advertising is this obsession with awards and Cannes in particular. I think it is utterly irrelevant today. I think the less attention that we pay to, I'll tell you my problem with that, the awards is the fact that the industry gets a reward system that is not linked to the market or linked to anything meaningful. It is a craft led, and advertising is not craft. Advertising is a commercial business. It is meant to produce outcomes. Craft is important only to the extent to which it produces an outcome, right? By itself, craft means nothing. I think also when you find a reward system that makes you feel good about yourself, which has nothing to do with clients, has nothing to do with the how brands do, I just find it a complete. Why no other industry awards itself like this? And you don't want outsiders to come in at all. You're you're producing work for the outside world, but to judge it, you want only your people and your own thing because nobody else understands it, but you're making it for them. So, firstly, no other industry is this obsessed with patting themselves on the back. It takes you away from acknowledging reality. It takes you away from acknowledging the fact that your world is shrinking, and it gives you a false sense of comfort. And the number of awards has gone berserk. You'll find senior creative people on jury duty, etc. I just, to what end? Why do you need to award yourself? I mean, no one, right? To say
Right.
to use this as a measure of any kind, that do we do better at Cannes? So bloody what?
Do you feel the same way about Effies?
Exactly. If I'll tell you why. My problem with Effies is the other problem. If your brand is doing well in the marketplace, that is your reward, no? In a commercial film situation, is there an award for Animal because it died 1,000 crores? I'm saying,
I mean,
why are awards important? Why do you need to congratulate yourself? You're a professional. That is your job. That your big bloody deal, yaar. Your job was to do well for a brand. It did well for the brand. Now, so what? That was your job. It's not, see, I'm not against awards actually. I'm against the primacy awards get. I'm against the fact that they occupy a disproportionate. It is a full-time quest. It is the way agencies talk about themselves. It's the way they think about themselves. It is the validation that they get. They should get validation from working on the brands and then doing stuff from the brands in because they don't get that validation. Because they're not doing enough for the brands. See, because you don't get validations from clients, you seek validation elsewhere. You used to get validation from consumers when people talked about the advertising in parties. That was validation. When people said, "Arey, ye ad dekha aapne? Kamal ka banaya." That is validation. But now you want a false, a constructed form of validation, right? And so my problem is not with the awards per se, it is with the need for validation that industry has and where it seeks that validation and where it creates the system where it is validating itself all the time. And it is not even allowing outside forces to come in and say, validate it. You are constantly validating yourself. Why? Why this obsessive need? I think the industry would be so much more professional, so much more mature, so much more business minded and able to move. So, for instance, let me just give you an example for what I mean, somewhat lateral example. Why did the industry not, instead of insisting on copywriters and having people, why did it not hire, 1,000 creators and said that my advertising now will be created by creators. I will create content through creators. Why am I so to only have my existing structure? Why should the creator ecosystem not have been an advertising owned ecosystem? Why did nobody even think of that? Why did advertising agencies not invest in startup brands and say, okay, give me 5% stake, give me 10% stake, I'll do your work for you? Why? No, not a single large agency.
Not a large agency, but you think
One and a half examples. One and a half examples, Vishal. Why have the Publicis of the world and the McCanns of the world and not done it? Right? They have
that doesn't suit their commercial model.
no. I'll tell you. Fundamentally, commercial models. The problem is if you're a wage slave, right? If you're selling time, which is what you're doing right now, you're the key to build a business here is to assetize, productize and assetize. Advertising does neither. It neither productizes. Productize means your N+1 revenue should not involve incremental cost, right? That's what product is. Once you make a product, then and you invest in making the product, whether you sell the 1,000 or the 1 lakh, all that is incremental revenue for you. That is what having a product is, right? Where the variable cost goes down, significantly. Every time you have a new client, you have to have a new cost center. You have to do a new, fundamentally it's a broken model. And the model, nobody has thought seriously enough about the model because you're just too self-satisfied. And that is my problem with advertising.
Let's talk about people getting into our business. If you were building a brand strategy curriculum for people getting into the business, young Indian marketers, what is that one discipline that you think is completely absent from their mind space right now that you would like to include?
Anthropology.
Anthropology, right? And you think not enough attention is paid there?
No, none. Virtually none. I think, see, what are we trying to do? We are trying to move minds, at scale, collectively. So how do you understand how collective minds work? How do you understand how human beings work in collectives? So there's either sociology, which works through social structures, and anthropology, right? So I think these are disciplines that are foundational disciplines that help you understand how people think, particularly when they're influenced by each other. And psychology looks at it through the individual lens, but when we look at culture, we are looking at how people are embedded in a larger kind of a collective way of seeing things and how they influence each other. I think that to me is the foundational discipline of understanding people from an advertising perspective.
Sure. And my final question, Santosh, you've been very kind and gracious with your time. Do you think brand as a concept was built for a world of information scarcity? Because the world we live in now, unlimited content, hyper personalization, you have AI generated everything. So, is the idea of brand as a consistent singular identity, is that anti-consumer, and what would replace it?
Question. I think that's a fascinating question. And at one level, I would argue that my simple English language definition of a brand is that it's a pattern of expectations, right? It's a pattern of expectations that we have about something, right? Do we need expectations about something? Will we continue to need expectations about something? I would say yes, unless we live in a world where one moment is disconnected from the previous one. Then every moment is new, and so therefore there is no concept of expectations. So the world is discrete and not continuous. Are we moving to a world like that? You could argue to some extent, but not really. So as things stand at a foundational level, I do think the idea that we will continue to want things to mean something with some consistency. However, the timelessness of a brand, so the units of time in which we want consistency have shrunk. And the ability that we have to accept the fact that things can evolve has. So the way that I would explain it is that our earlier mental model of the brand was like a lake with boundaries around it. That's why, or a fortress. That's why we also refer to ourselves as brand guardians, right? The fact that you are actually patrolling the perimeters of the brand and making sure that they stay the same. I think today the brand is like a river where Heraclitus said this, that you never step in the same river twice. So in a sense, you don't interact with the same brand twice, but the Ganga is still the Ganga, right? So the brand and the meaning of the Ganga is still the Ganga, although the contents in it change every moment. So I think I would see that as a more fluid definition of the brand, where the brand is constantly kind of, moving, and like the river, it can kind of bend its way, it can, change its banks sometimes, but there is still an essential need for people to see it in some coherence. They cannot, I think, if you were to completely change meaning from one moment to the other, it would cause disorientation. But if you were to keep altering, adding along a essential kind of a track, I think that would not only be accepted, it would be essential. Without that, you would become static and boring. So I think in a way we are at a stage where the brand is a much more dynamic idea, much more changeable idea, without the fundamental meaning changing dramatically, certainly not moment to moment. But I still feel, therefore, the brand as of now continues to be a relevant idea, but it needs to be modified and reimagined for the current context.
Thank you so much, Santosh. This has been wonderful. Such a massive learning. This is a fanboy moment for me, to be honest. And thank you again for being so kind, so gracious.
Not at all,
Thank you.
Vishal. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed the chat. Thank you.
That was Santosh Desai. And if you're anything like me, you're already replaying half of what he said in your brain. Boardroom strategy on one side, a philosopher's eye on India on the other side. That's a rare combination. Today we got both. Next Monday, episode 74 of the Indian AdGeek will feature Safir Jamal of Pastination. If you've enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, leave us a review, drop a rating, share it with someone who might enjoy it. The Indian AdGeek streams on all major podcast apps. I'm active on social everywhere. Hit me up with your feedback at Vishal1 Mehra. Until next time, keep your creative antennas tuned and your ad geek flag flying high. Stay quirky, stay curious, and keep geeking out.